the Executive Director of the Ridgefield Historical Society. Thank you all very much for joining us for today's talk by Keith Jones. He's the founding president of the Ridgefield Historical Society, and he's going to be talking about his new book, The Battle of Ridgefield. Thank you to our friends here at St. Stephen's Church for allowing us to use this beautiful space. Keith's book will be available for purchase and signing this evening, and I encourage all of you to get a copy of this stellar new book. And please join us for a reception after the presentation. The Ridgefield Historical Society is an independent nonprofit organization founded in 2001 with headquarters in the historic 1714 Scott House at 4 Sunset Lane. The Historical Society's purpose is to preserve, interpret, and foster public knowledge of Ridgefield's historical, cultural, and architectural heritage. We're dedicated to preserving and sharing the entire history of Ridgefield, from the indigenous peoples who lived here 10,000 years ago all the way to the present day. We maintain a collection of over 10,000 Ridgefield artifacts in a climate-controlled vault under the Scott House, and the collection is accessible on our website. Archaeology is of special interest to us, and we encourage the identification and preservation of the historic sites and artifacts buried beneath our feet here in Ridgefield by professional archaeologists before these sites are destroyed and lost forever during construction projects. I invite all of you to get involved in the Historical Society by becoming members and volunteers. Membership contributions are the primary means by which we fund the important work that we do for the community, ranging from our National Park Service Battle of Ridgefield Archaeology Project, where we are researching the history of this battle through archaeological investigations. And if you have a property here in town that you'd like to consider for this study, please reach out to me. To the forensic analysis of the skeletal remains found on the battlefield, which the Historical Society is spearheading. To our production of the Battle of Ridgefield reenactment on Main Street every 5 years. Be sure to save the date for the next one. It's the 250th anniversary, and it's April 24th, 2027. To our educational programming for Ridgefield students at the Peter Parley Schoolhouse, to the Witness Stones Project that teaches 8th graders about the enslaved residents of Ridgefield, to our new Ridgefield Native American History program with the Ridgefield High School, to the Ridgefield Oral History Project, preserving the diverse stories of our residents, from World War II veterans, folks who grew up in Ridgefield, to those who survived the COVID pandemic, and LGBTQIA+ individuals whose student volunteers from Ridgefield High School are currently interviewing. To our restoration of the historic 1872 Branchville Schoolhouse into a community meeting and exhibition space. To the Historic Resources Inventory Project, which is our partnership with the town to document the history of over 300 buildings in Ridgefield. To the Ridgefield History Club, which meets monthly to discuss the town's history. To our student scholarship and paid summer student internship program, where we are educating the next generation of historians, and our many community events like today's presentation. We just launched our 2024-2025 membership campaign and created the Katuna Circle. This is a new sustaining membership tier with special benefits for select benefactors of Ridgefield's history. Please join us and go to our website, ridgefieldhistoricalsociety.org, to learn more about what we're doing for the community. So for tonight, we have a very special guest who will be introducing Keith. Dr. Walter Woodward is the State Historian Emeritus. He served as Connecticut State Historian for 18 years from 2004 to 2022. Dr. Woodward is a retired UConn history professor and a scholar of New England and early America, whose understanding of the American Revolution and American freedom was profoundly changed in a Ridgefield basement on a cold day in December of 2019. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Woodward back to Ridgefield.
I think I'm probably the second most excited person about this book, because I am, well, let me tell you why. Nearly a quarter century ago, hard to believe, I read with admiration Keith Jones' first book about the Battle of Ridgefield, Farmers Against the Crown. Deeply researched and beautifully written, it was not just comprehensive, it was definitive. Then State Historian Christopher Collier wrote that it was likely to be the standard account of the battle for a long, long time. And so it has been. 22 years later, thanks to the work of an entire generation of historians, archaeologists, and the explosion of internet-facilitated primary source material access, we know so much more about the Battle of Ridgefield than we did in 2002, that a reconsideration was not just warranted, it actually became mandatory in 2019. And who better to provide the new definitive account of the battle than Keith Jones? Oh, did I do it? I can fix this. Have I been?
Thank you.
There you go. So sorry. Didn't mean to steal your thunder. I meant to actually bring in some clouds. So, who better to provide the new definitive account, my arm is tied behind my back, than Keith Jones? The result is the book we launch here tonight. Jones conclusively shows, there's so much that's new in this, that the Battle of Ridgefield was much more significant than we previously realized. It was indeed the opening move in the British campaign to isolate New England from the other states, and by doing so, end the rebellion. British General Howe sent his most experienced and battle-hardened troops in numbers greater than at the battles of Lexington, Concord, Trenton, or Princeton. They meant business. And while this ensured that there would be a British victory, and it was a British victory, it turned out to be a victory with consequences that ultimately helped assure Britain would lose the revolution. Captivating reading throughout, the Battle of Ridgefield retells the story of the Danbury campaign from the perspective of the British and American commanders, while at the same time vividly recreating the experiences of the rank-and-file soldiers engaged in its often chaotic, bloody, and terrifying events. The commanders' stories reveal how temperament, character, ambition, and chance melded to shape military strategies and outcomes, while the soldiers' accounts let us feel viscerally how those command decisions were experienced by the men tasked with carrying them out. There's so much to learn, so much to enjoy, and so much to reflect upon in Keith Jones' important new work. And it's my honor to introduce the author who has once again produced what will be the definitive account of the Battle of Ridgefield for many, many years to come. Keith?
Well, I hope that was recorded, and I will take it with me wherever I go to sell books down the road. First of all, it is so good to be back in Ridgefield. 26 years here raised our family, and there is no town who is so proud of its heritage and has such good reason to be. Steve mentioned I was founding president of the Ridgefield Historical Society, but make no mistake, Gene Timpanelli had the vision and the personal drive to make it all happen. And I don't know how many of you know Jean or knew Jean, but she was maybe about this tall, reserved, and she had a way of asking you for something softly and then just standing there with these big brown eyes waiting until you said yes. So she said, we need somebody with a marketing background to run our first society. So I did that part while she raised the money and created the vision. So Jean, hope you're watching from somewhere. Also, thank you to the Ridgefield Historical Society of today. I mean, all the things that they're doing were just wild dreams for us at the time. I mean, we needed money just to maintain the Scott House, and thinking about all these other programs was someday. Ridgefield is so fortunate to have a professional, full-time, paid executive director. Only about a third of the historical societies in Connecticut have a professional executive director. So once again, thanks. And then thanks, of course, to all of you who are making my big return to a town after too long possible. So first of all, could I have a show of hands? How many of you have been to a Battle of Ridgefield presentation before? How many have been to 3 or more? Okay, I can see there are converts right here. So for me, sometimes the Battle of Ridgefield is a religious experience, but I never thought that I would be preaching to converts under the roof of St. Stephen's Episcopal Church. It's really a weird experience. And the street right outside here is where a British Army came by, and it wasn't a cakewalk, and that's what we'll go into. I guess what I want to do is, first of all, for those who don't know the Battle of Ridgefield story, let me give you the short form so that you can make sense of the long form. April 25th, British Army lands in Campo. April 26th, they march unopposed to Danbury, begin burning the Continental Supply Depot there, which was the nexus for New England supplies to George Washington's army. The 27th, they found out that there was a Patriot gang behind them, and word of Benedict Arnold, who was known in London that time as the most active of the rebels, and they didn't want to take him on, so they took a different path back. That path led to Ridgefield, and up to Ridgefield there was no resistance. Continental Congress even knew that the Tory infestation of southwestern Connecticut was a worrisome matter. Ridgefield is where the resistance gave the message there is a price to be paid when you invade Connecticut. And never again during the course of the war did an inland battle or action or even invasion take place. Ridgefield made clear, and then the subsequent day at Campo Beach, as the British left, Arnold struck again and made clear. So that's the short form. The long form is going to come to you in 3 parts. The first part is the historiography. That's the history of the Battle of Ridgefield, because that's a learning experience of its own. The second is the battle itself, which is the most fun to actually see, because now we know an order of battle, thanks to the National Park Study Phase 1 survey of 2022. We know the order of the battle. We know the casualties. We know the outcome. The third part deals with the consequences, which were far more far-reaching than my first book contemplated, and I think scholars going forward will want to look more closely at it. So it's an adventure to the past, and any adventure to the past, I suggest we keep this in mind. Joseph Ellis, for my money, is the most succinct living contemporary historian of the War for Independence to try to understand it. He tells us, keep in mind that the past is not history. It's a vast black hole of the dead, the gone, the unknown, the forgotten. What we call history is just what we choose to remember, and then the operative word there is choose. I had to choose when writing this book between a lot of stories that were thin on fact. Example, Sybil Ludington. Everybody's heard of Sybil Ludington, most people. The female Paul Revere in the dead of the night that rode 40 miles to alert 334 men of her father's regiment, Colonel Francis Ludington of the 7th Dutchess County. Okay? That's fact. Also fact is she was 16. She did live at home. Her father did command the regiment, and 3 to 4 companies of that Dutchess County regiment did participate in the Battle of Ridgefield. There is no fact whatsoever that Sybil made the ride. There's no family letter. There is nothing in the 33 markers that are spread around Carmel of the houses that she visited, of anyone living there recalling the ride. There is no pension record of the 112 soldiers of Ludington's regiment who made it here, and the 13 who actually filed for a pension. There's no diary, there is no newspaper account whatsoever. Does that mean it didn't happen? Of course not. 1777, any farm girl or farm boy could get on a horse and go for a ride at night, and it was something so unspectacular, why would anybody just write that down? So the mystery is left to us, but without the facts, I chose not to include it in my coverage. Well, historiography. I told you we choose how we remember our history. We chose in 1777 to remember it as a skirmish, just a sideshow in the burning of the Danbury Depot. By the mid-1800s, it was considered an episode in failure, both sides, for the British and for us. 1927, what happened then? 150th anniversary of the battle. What happens? It's called a battle in its own right by local historians. And now we're approaching 2027, not only as a battle, but a candidate for National Park Service Battleground Protection Program. Whatever happened on the ground was the same thing, but what we've chosen to interpret has been like that. Let me just touch quickly on it. This is the Connecticut Journal a few days after the battle. A stubborn skirmish. About an hour, our men behaved with great spirit, but overpowered by numbers, were obliged to give way. The British paper in New York said it this way, I knew that would happen. A minor skirmish, carried after small opposition, with considerable loss of the life of the opponent's rebel side. Well, England saw it this way. This was the print that's in the Keeler Tavern, titled A Skirmish in America Between the King's Troop and Arnold. So 1770, 1780, both sides of the Atlantic, it's a skirmish. Then what happens? We can't go backward in history, we can go backward in slides. Mercy Otis Warren, I don't know if you've heard of her. She published one of the first comprehensive records of the Revolution and the aftermath. But she pissed off John Adams because she didn't give him the coverage he thought he wanted. And she was a woman, so it never made it. But it's terrific reading, highly opinionated. Her sources were impeccable. Martha Washington was one of her sources, as well as Abigail Adams. Well, trivial expedition to Danbury, a rencounter. No skirmish now, we've got a rencounter. Well, 1858, the book recounting battles of America calls it, the expedition to Danbury was disgraceful to the people of Connecticut, who permitted it, as to General Tryon, who planned and executed it. And then we have the rare historian who's knighted, that doesn't happen a lot, Sir George Trevelyan, the British historian, called it a desultory and isolated raid aiming at no solid military advantage, foredoomed to disaster, and exceptionally irritating to the local inhabitants. So we've come a long way from a stubborn skirmish. By 1850, it was forgotten. Why? No George Washington, no Continental Army, a British victory didn't alter the course of the war, and the stench of Arnold's treason lasted for more than a century and a half. If you've read the book Valiant Ambition by Philbrook, he goes into great depth about how long that stench of patriotism colored everything, and Ridgefield was part of that. Also, we need to know around this time, our schools began teaching history of the Revolution through great men, founding fathers. And when it came to the battlefield, it was George Washington and the Continental Army. The militia didn't make the history books when many generations grew up. It was a heroic, romantic age. It was Washington and the Continental Army. But Ridgefield remembered. In 1927, local historian Rockwell published the history of Ridgefield, and he had a full chapter called The Battle of Ridgefield. James Case, whose account of the Danbury raid is still very readable, anecdotal, but highly readable, also called it a battle. Fast forward to the 175th, Silvio Bedini, some of you may have known him, calls it a battle. The bicentennial, McDevitt, a Danbury independent historian, takes the battle, still a battle, from the British viewpoint. And then Howard Peckham, one of the deans of recording the bicentennial, listed Danbury campaign as one of 41 campaigns of the American Revolution. So we're on the map. And then another local historian by the name of Jones, way back in 2002, put out what he tried to make the definitive account of the battle itself with eyewitness stuff instead of anecdotal. And Kit Collier said it was going to last a long, long time. Well, a long, long time is 22 years, because in a single generation, a whole tide of new information has come regarding the Battle of Ridgefield. You all know the digital revolution. I used to go to libraries in Fairfield County to get local town histories. Now on my screen, I can put a half a dozen town histories up and go to pages where one man is done and reflect on the perspective of where do I put that person in the battle. Pension requests, they used to be on microfilm in the National Archives. Now those can be digitally accessed for a small fee, or if you're an educational institution, directly. The British National Archives have put 70,000 colonial documents online from Kew. So the command structure on the British side is now visible, and as you would guess, it's prickly. Founders Online has the correspondence of all of our 7 or 8 leading founding fathers, the letters they received, the letters they sent. George Washington, 31,000 letters that he wrote, and another 20,000 he received. Those letters show us Washington was involved in the Battle of Ridgefield, and not in the most flattering way. So, National Park Service pulled that together and did their own basic scope survey, order of battle, scope of battle, participants, timeline, and finished that about, 2 years ago now. So I was able to take all of that and write a new book, which turned out to be 90% new content, and so my literary agent said, you can't use the same title. So what better title than the Battle of Ridgefield? Well, in writing this book, the idea was basically moving from a skirmish in the Danbury raid to really where Governor Tryon's vision for British hegemony over the southwestern Connecticut came to die. And that was a surprise to me. I never knew that the British really thought that they could pull southwestern Connecticut back. And I go into a lot of detail on that, and I'll share some of that tonight. Well, we changed this, a single-dimensional black and white version of the battle, to this, 3-dimensional and full color of a real battle. So as going forward, Walt mentioned that I'm trying to tell 2 stories at once. One is sequence on the ground, the dots of Campo Bay, Danbury, Ridgefield, back to Campo. But I discovered there's another story, a larger one, and that is the egos and the actions of 5 leading officers from both sides who made those dots align the way that they did. And they all had flaws, they all had ambitions, and they all had a certain drive that pulled this together. We probably would start with the most responsible for the Danbury raid, William Tryon, a competent governor of New York, perhaps the best governor of British New York in their history. An ambitious man and a vain man, and an extremely disappointed man when General Howe turned up with 30,000 troops and pretty much made him a figurehead. Military law canceled out civil law, and this ambitious man who is working himself up to British society found himself really out of the loop. He became a spy master. In fact, you may know, he tried to kidnap George Washington and present him as a gift to Howe when he arrived, and it backfired, but that's another story. But he had a spy network throughout New England all the way to Philadelphia, and he was recruiting, and he was making that at the disposal of the British. But deep down, he wanted to be a general. He had to be a general. It was a military takeover, and if he was going to have any role, he had to be a general. And so, on December 26th, he was impelled by an event that made him act. We know what that is, right? December 26, 1776, Trenton. Washington comes out of nowhere, takes the Hessian garrison. The British cakewalk of 1777 is over. They need a strategy, they need a battle plan, they need money, they need troops, and Tryon sees an opening for himself. So what does he do? He writes to London to the Lord George Germain, the head Secretary of State for the American Operations, asking for a major general's rank, claiming southwestern Connecticut was there to be had because there were so many friends, and letting that sit. At the same time, he went to Sir William Howe and proposed to him the rank and the plan. King George blesses it, funds it. April 20th of 1777, he gets his rank of Major General of Provincials, which was not exactly what he's hoping for, because that means you don't command redcoats, you command greencoats. But he had up to 3,000 provincial troops at his disposal. And then he lands at Campo Beach. So this is very much Tryon's vision, as well as part of Howe's plan for now I've got to fight a campaign. Sir William was the most decorated soldier of general officer status in the British Army. His willingness to bleed in battle was without doubt. He was Knight Commander of the British Empire. He was Member of Parliament. He was connected to King George through his mother, Sophie, in an illicit affair of George's father. This was a man not to be trifled with, and he didn't think that Tryon was the kind of general that fit in his army. He didn't like political generals. He was a soldier's soldier. So what did he do? He assigns Sir William Erskine, who really is the person who ran the show in the campaign for the raid of Danbury. Sir William was knighted in 1857 in battles in Germany. He was a cavalryman, dragoon, lieutenant colonel, who captured 16 military banners, 16 military units in one action at Elmsdorf. And he brought them back, laid them before the king, and voila, knighthood. He also was merciless. On a foraging raid in New Jersey, he bayoneted captured Americans rather than have to deal with bringing them back. He was the quartermaster general of Howe's army. And he put together the army and the resources for the campaign. 1,950 troops, as Professor Woodward told you, more soldiers than a lot of the battles we were taught were significant turning points. 6 of the best tested veteran redcoat infantry regiments, including Howe's own regiment, 6 artillery pieces, and a squadron of 17th Mounted Dragoons. Reputations for viciousness, these dragoons, and they loved it. They had a death's head skull on their hat, crossbones, and enjoyed playing the role. He threw all of these together in an expeditionary force that could not fail, because Tryon notwithstanding as a political general, this was the kickoff to the British campaign of 1777, and it was not going to fail. Now, while the British burned Danbury and were huddling there, thinking they were sleeping that night, 3 generals for the Patriot side found themselves together in Reading, Connecticut. And by midnight, they were in Bethel, and they hatched a plan on how they were going to take on Tryon's army. They determined they would split their force in 2 because they didn't know whether he'd come back the way he came or head back by a different route. So 2 of the generals took 400 men and prepared to march towards Ridgefield if that were the way to go. And the other general took 200 men, later reinforced, to block the road back to Fairfield. Who were they? Well, I got so excited about the Patriot side, I skipped 2 more men. To show you the depth of the talent that was with the British Army, staff officers that Erskine brought included this 24-year-old, is that dashing? I mean, are we talking dashing here? 24-year-old major of the highest rank of nobility, who was also a quality soldier. He became a lieutenant general in the army and was knighted for taking the island of Malta without losing a man from the Spanish. Also on board, you got to have an engineer when you go out in the field with an army. Lieutenant Archibald Robertson. He became a lieutenant general too and ran the entire corps of engineers for the British Army. So Howe did not skimp on talent. Who did we put up against him? First, David Wooster, 66 years old, hears about the action, gets on his horse, rides through the rain, 66 years old, 30-some miles from New Haven, to take command, because he was the commanding officer. He headed all militia in Connecticut, but his career was in the dumps. He was branded as too conservative, too old, too puritanical, and slow to act, and even Washington gave him a letter of reprimand when he let him down. This, for Wooster, was the last chapter of his career, which was a long one and quite distinguished early. It was also not his duty, but it was a chance to set the record really straight on David Wooster's long contribution. He did not expect the next man to ride in, who came in uninvited on his own portfolio, also from New Haven, but he intercepted the Patriot column before Wooster even got there. And you can see this is pretty true to life from what I could tell of Benedict Arnold. He does emanate strength, shoulders, dashing leadership projects from him. But he was irritated probably more than Wooster because he'd been passed over for his second star. There was no doubt his combat record was the finest in the Patriot Army, and yet 5 less qualified generals were by Congress given a second star. He was contemplating resigning his commission and going to Philadelphia and telling him. When he was in New Haven, he also got a letter. He's impetuous, of course, and when he was in Boston at a salon, he met a 16-year-old debutante that he fell in love with, and within a month proposed marriage to. Even sent her a trunk full of the latest fashions from the Boston stores. But awaiting Arnold, of course, was a letter from her mother, who did not have time for a lame, because he was wounded in one of the campaigns, of middling wealth, because much of his wealth had gone to the cause, and twice the age of her daughter, rebel general, because she was a loyalist. So you can imagine the mood that Arnold was in, and get on a horse, get to Ridgefield, win that second star the same way you got the first. Battlefield. He was promoted colonel and brigadier general after the fact because of battlefield valor. Why not do it again? Also there was another general, a different kind of general. It was Gold Silliman, a pillar of the Fairfield community, raised to be a lawyer, but if you were a wealthy man in Connecticut in that days, you became a leader of the military because people would follow you because of your prominence. A pillar of the community. Ego was basically one of doing the duty and protecting his family name. With him was the men who fought. These are the heroes of the Battle of Ridgefield right here. This is the 4th Brigade of Connecticut Militia out of 6. Silliman commanded. He had 4 colonels. Every chartered town in Fairfield County had men there, and even 3 towns in Litchfield County, because the 13th Connecticut Regiment hailed from outside of Fairfield County. 1,203 men they totaled on paper, but 250% elsewhere, so you got about 1,000 troops available. 600 turned out. So in their own backyard, the Connecticut militia got a little more than maybe 60% to 2/3. Some people may have missed it, but my suspicion is a lot of them were what you would call a closet Tory. You had to show up for the militia because you get a writ to appear in court if you didn't during the drills, and so you kept your loyalties to yourself till you saw how the wind blew. At least that's one person's take, but that's and there is some evidence. At any rate, this is the force of 600 that gets divided up. Now there's a wild card that I didn't really pay enough attention to that could have changed the entire Battle of Ridgefield scenario, and that's General Alexander McDougall at Peekskill. Washington put in there a flinty Scot who overcame a stammer, went to sea as a young man and came back as a captain of a privateer and a wealthy man. Not a man to be trifled with, definitely a rough-edged, flinty Scot. He had 1,200 Continental troops in Peekskill, 35 miles from Ridgefield. Had he marched a day before, entirely different story. But he didn't march because of this man, George Washington. And I love this picture of this. This is a painting of Washington in 1776. You can see the youth, the grace, the athleticism, at least I do, and he was a big man, and he knew how to dress the part as well. He personally selected Danbury as the supply depot to feed Peekskill, which in turn would feed men and material from New England into New Jersey, to Morristown, and then on to Philadelphia, where he saw the action coming. Governor Trumbull of Connecticut said, George, well, he wouldn't use that. Your Excellency, we need Continental troops to protect the Danbury Depot. More than twice, George said no, basically because he didn't have the soldiers. But he was also faked out by General Howe, who did a number of things to make Washington believe that the real assault was going to be on Philadelphia, and Howe convinced McDougal to order, it convinced Washington to order McDougal to stay near so you can respond if I call. So McDougal hung around in Peekskill while the British ravaged Danbury. Well, Washington was also warned 4 days before the British arrived. A recruiting agent for Tryon from Rogers Rangers was arrested in Danbury, court-martialed and sentenced to hang, and during the trial he spilled the beans that, these are the exact words, the enemy will land on the coast about 20 miles from this place and attempt to destroy the magazine of provisions here. So Danbury should not have been a surprise. What did Parsons do? Evidently nothing. To be fair, he really didn't have the troops, and we know Washington didn't have the troops. Neither one of them have left a record of a response to this warning. Well, pulling it all together now, let's move to the action part of the presentation. And that is, Danbury was Howe's opening move of the 1777 campaign. He destroyed the Peekskill Depot on the 22nd. The idea is you shut off New England supplies from Washington's Continental Army. On April 2nd, he gave Tryon 3,000 men to enter Connecticut, as circumstances may point out. And that may well be before he even knew there was Danbury Depot. April 15th, he put 10,000 troops in northern New Jersey on alert and did a lot of demonstrations to make Washington feel that they were coming through New Jersey to Philadelphia. On the 20th, he gave the orders to Tryon to destroy the Danbury Depot, and on the 21st, he sent a diversionary fleet up the Hudson River. The real attack was coming up the East River to land at Campo. The same fleet, 12 transports, 5 frigates, went up the Hudson River with no troops on board to decoy both Washington as well as McDougal to think, no, the real landing is going to be there. And it worked. It worked. Now, our friend, Governor and Major General Tryon had told England and told Howe that the loyalists in Connecticut would rise up and turn up because they'd seen in Westchester County a true civil war was going on in lower Westchester County. And Tryon, through his vanity, came to believe that there were enough loyalists in southwestern Connecticut to do the same thing. 1/3 of churchgoers went to the Church of England in Fairfield County in 1777. The Church of England, of course, you pray for King George in the morning prayer. Congregationalist Connecticut's didn't do that. The militia failed to muster several times during 1776 from Cole to New York. 16 companies at least did not respond to muster to aid Washington in New York. I discovered 403 writs to individual soldiers who refused to turn out when called to action against the British. So there was something to Tryon's thought. And over 1,000 Connecticut men had already come across Long Island to join loyalist regiments, aching to come back, reclaim their homes, and tell their neighbors, you better join the best of kings before it's too late. Closet Tories, how could you tell? If you were identified as a Tory, you had to swear an oath of passivity and post a bond. It was easier just to keep your mouth shut and see which way the wind would blow. And then Westchester County was truly on fire down below Pelham Manor and that whole area. So there was good reason to think that there would be Tory support for Tryon. In fact, when General Wooster saw Danbury burning, he wrote to Governor Trumbull, there may be greater danger from the Western Tories from the British regulars. And Congress knew about it. John Adams, when he heard Danbury was burned, penned this. This is one of the most beautiful ones. This is John Adams talking here. And the stupid, sordid, cowardly, torrified country people of Fairfield County, let them pass without opposition. So that's rattling around the halls of Philadelphia as Danbury burns. Well, research has shown that what used to be considered just 3 separate engagements has really been a continuous battle. As soon as the British Army left Danbury into Ridgebury Parish, gunfire began, and our best evidence is it was the New York regiments, New York companies of militia that instigated the action, not the Connecticut men. But the records are pretty slim, so there's more research to be done there. 3 engagements. Remember I told you how they split the troops 400, 200. Arnold and Silliman would take 400 and head to Ridgefield. Wooster with 200, at least of his own command, would be a pincer movement to close in when that happened. Excuse me, I think Wooster's descendants are on me already for putting him down. Well, there were 3 separate engagements, but imagine instead from Ridgebury Parish all the way to Ridgefield, popping rifles going on virtually incessantly. Of the engagements, however, we found that Wooster, who initiated the 2 first engagements, had more men than anyone previously thought. This came out in the National Park Service study and my own. His 200 men of the 16th and 13th were augmented by 150 of Major Beardsley, who had New Fairfield and the Milford men. There were 6 companies of New York militia, 6 separate companies that were in the surrounds with Wooster. How closely they were communicating, we don't know. From Litchfield came units of the 17th Militia. From Milford, there were units of the 2nd Militia. Militia were pouring in from all over, and Wooster ended up with about the same number of men that Arnold had, although they were spread out, and we don't know for sure how they operated together. Most likely they didn't. At any rate, Wooster struck right as the British had finished their midday meal near where the Scotland School is in Ridgebury Parish, and took half of the wagon train from Tryon's marching army, took 40 prisoners, at least 13 were British soldiers, and vanished without losing a man, because the British were on the march and they kept on going. About an hour later, Wooster struck again. This time he was following the British Army down the road to Ridgefield, and what we find is he marched into a trap. Now, everything I had read before the National Park Service study was that Wooster was leading his men forward and attacked the rear guard. Erskine knew better. Erskine, at a bend in the road, put 3 cannon back and an armed rear guard primed and loaded, and as Wooster came around the bend, all hell broke loose. And soon he was enveloped. We have eyewitnesses saying Wooster's first horse went down. He tried to capture a cannon on foot. They were almost surrounded. He ordered a retreat, and he was mounting his horse to retreat when he was shot obliquely through the side. That pretty much changes the story. It doesn't hurt his narrative of dying later for his country in a valiant mode, because he was really putting himself out in front. But we can prove for certain that his son Thomas was not killed there. He was not even there. Even Nathaniel Philbrook in his Benedict Arnold biography has Thomas's son there being bayoneted. This is sometimes history. If we go back to the first slide, we choose to pass on things that we haven't verified the fact. So Wooster is mortally wounded. His men scatter. The British Army marches towards Ridgefield. Many of you may have seen this picture. It dates 1860. It was a sketch made by Bernard Lossing for the book he was writing. That's the Stebbins house, Benjamin Stebbins' house on the right. Casagmo occupies that on the hillside going down. The notch in the road was an absolutely superb defensive position. A winding road, uphill, stone walls, ledges on the left-hand side, forest, two ridges on the opposite side for guarding your flanks. It was splendid. Now, I always wondered, and you probably have too, what was going through the mind of maybe 200 men who were around this barricade, staring down at an army that was a half a mile long, with flags, with fifers, with drummers, with a big dust storm behind them, and the smoke from Danbury behind them. Like, what could they have been thinking? We don't know, but I do know for sure. I know what they knew. And what they knew was that every one of those British regulators had one of these. The Brown Dress Short Land Musket. The Brown Dress is 75 caliber. The M16 of American military now is 50 caliber, and those bullets are designed to penetrate. The musket ball was not designed to penetrate, it was designed to smash, bone, and destroy, and because the muzzle velocity was not like current weaponry, it could be lodged in the body. What happens then? Sepsis. Every one of those men knew when they saw this army coming, could fire 3 rounds from this in a minute, and had a 17-inch bayonet. They knew what they were up against. Many of them had vests of their own. How terrifying could that be? If you're 35 years old with 3 children and a wife at home, and you've just begun to seed your farm, and there you are looking at that from a bridge barricade. We know they must have known that. Thank you. This was my old desk when I was a reenactor. I spent more nights sleeping with Bess for 5 years, I think, than with my wife in my reenactor years. Thanks, Mike Zepp, for bringing that. Well, here's the battle. You're at the barricade. You're looking out, seeing this coming. This is a little small detail, I think, for those in the back. So you can all see the red square right in the middle. That's the house of Benjamin Stebbins, 86 years old. He's in the house. He stays. He's going to watch this whole thing happen around him. From the top, the British are marching towards the Stebbins house, where you see a barricade across the road, and you see some blue bars. On the left, we know now that the New York militia took the left flank, and that the 4th Connecticut Regiment, Silliman's own, took the middle, along with men from the 5th and 6th Continental Line, who were really no more than a bunch of volunteers who hadn't reported for service yet, for the most part. On the opposite flank was the 9th Connecticut, which were Stamford, Norwalk, Greenwich men. The horses were kept in the back. We find that a lot of men did arrive on horseback, which explains how the quick getaway took place afterwards, when many had horses tethered there. Arnold was at the rear of the line. Erskine determined to shell the line with 6 artillery pieces from behind his troops. So he's shooting probably from at least a half a mile or more away at the barricade. He sends probing units to each of the flanks to probe, do the Patriots have flanks guarded? He finds out they do. He knows he's dealing with a professional general. Skirmishers were set out by Arnold to take on the British by surprise as they come up. Skirmishers, that's what a professional general sends out, not amateurs. So Erskine had to know, one, he was facing a true army here, and was probably Arnold. He then amasses all of his troops, and in one gigantic thrust, after moving 3 artillery pieces to the front to shell the barricade, they sweep forward. One regiment or more on one flank, 1 regiment or more on the other flank. In the middle, between the left flank and the Patriot center, came the Loyalist regiment of Connecticut men wearing the green jackets, who had the most difficult job of all, climb these ledges, no longer there, that Arnold thought were unscalable, and so he left undefended, apparently, to the best of our knowledge. Well, it was all over in an hour. All of Arnold's line gave way, as best we could tell, at about the same time. But what the real deciding factor was, the provincial regiment that came up over the ledges broke through, and Arnold saw them, and he rode to the front to deal with them and rally his men, and a few went with him, but for the most part, his men were starting to pull back all the way along. There's good evidence that they fired a volley, that at least 9 musket balls took out his horse. He did go down. There's plenty of eyewitnesses who saw him fall. There's several eyewitnesses who saw him pull out his musket and shoot to death, or at least they thought he shot to death one of the advancing enemy, who could have been a Tory provincial, he could have been British. And then it gets trickier. Some accounts say that Arnold jumped over a fence and ran into a swamp. Other accounts say that he just ran away. But 2 eyewitnesses say no, he got into their horse, which seems to me makes a lot of sense. If you're the commanding general, you commandeer another horse. And one of them said it was even a horse taken from a British officer. So what do you believe? At any rate, the whole line collapses, both on High Ridge, on East Ridge, and down Main Street. The Patriot Militia withdraw, and they don't panic and run, because if they did, Arnold would have told us. Arnold had some unfortunate experiences with militia, and any panicking on their part, he would dump on them any chance he could get. But he didn't at Ridgefield. He did on Campo, where they broke and ran, and he must have thought that meant the end of his second star. The British take the town. They did not burn any residences along Town Street. They set fire to the church over here because it was a munitions depot, because they didn't come here to burn and destroy. The thinking was they would have support, and the last thing they wanted to do was turn those closet Tories against them. They did burn houses down around the junction of 35 and High Ridge, which is where the New York militia was likely retreating, so something probably happened there. They did fire at the Keeler Tavern, and you all know the anecdotal story about how they were about to turn it down, but the Tory neighbors saved it because they were neighbors. If that happened, he was also pretty smart, because Keeler's father was a town constable at the time, and after the British Army left, if you had come out for them, and there you are with your community, bad idea. They camped at the south of town. It was not an easy sleeping night. Several prisoners escaped, and then they went on to Campo in another action. Well, the toll? How many died there? I mean, that's one of the first questions. Is the battle, how many Americans died? Stebbins, who was there in the house, says 40 to 50. Arnold, who submitted a formal report, said Lieutenant Colonel Gold, who died leading his 4th Regiment, and about 20 killed at Ridgefield and Campo. Silliman, who was there, said it was Gold and 8 or 9 others at Ridgefield. Colonel Hughes, a quartermaster colonel who rode through and was talking to people while I was here, said, no, the 32 were killed at Ridgefield. The British said hundreds. You know, you write a report to London about your success, why not make yourself look good? My research and others found that there were 12 killed, and all around or the barricade or in Ridgefield. We couldn't identify anyone killed in Worcester's attack. 28 were wounded. There had to be more, and they'll turn up as the years go by, and 16 were captured. So we're talking 56 casualties versus 68 to 90 on the British side. So you get 125 to 140 killed, wounded, captured, and that is a battle. That's not just a chance encounter in the woods. So I mean, all of Ridgefield was wondering at one time, well, who were those guys? We don't know yet, but they could come from 6 different sources. From the British, most likely would be the 15th Regiment of Foot, who led the frontal attack on the barricade and lost 8 killed during the whole Danbury raid. It also could have been the Prince of Wales volunteers who came up over the ledges and must have taken some casualties. For my money, it was the Connecticut Militia. That of the 12 killed, those skeletons that surfaced in 2019, if I were a betting man, it would be that they were Connecticut Militia. But who knows? Maybe there are more bodies or remains that will turn up. So that's the death toll. Let's move to the third part, the consequences. What were the consequences of this that went on? First of all, the Continental Army supply chain was the Achilles heel of Washington's army. Congress, first of all, agreed move the depots further inland and guard them. Yeah, makes sense. Shut down Danbury for good, not reopened as a depot. But Congress, in its wisdom, had created a quartermaster department, an ordnance department, a medical department, a clothing department, a foraging department, and a wagons department, each with a department head in Philadelphia reporting to the Board of War. How do you run an army in the field to get stuff from a depot when you got to go through all of that? Now, Congress didn't fix it, but they did combine some of the departments, and importantly, they gave the quartermaster department control to Washington himself, so that he could requisition from the warehouses without having to go through the politics. Didn't fix it, as we found out at Valley Forge. Supply chain problems continued. The real revenge master was this guy. I mean, is that the picture of a Puritan Second Light Congregationalist or what? That's Jonathan Trumbull, the only sitting governor before the Revolution who was not appointed by the king, who was all in from the get-go. And two things bothered him very badly. One were attendees to the Church of England, and the other were Tories, because he came from the other side of the Connecticut River, which was true blue, linked with Boston, had their sons die at Bunker Hill and around, and there was absolutely no doubt the problem was in southwestern Connecticut. So what did Trumbull do? First of all, the obvious. If Washington isn't going to give me the troops, I'll get them myself. He raised 2 new battalions, expedited the formation of the 8 battalions that Washington already requested, posted 400 men down at the Greenwich border, and pretty much put the army as close to alert as it possibly could be. He also said that when the militia is called out, that they will be paid the same rate as Continental Army soldiers when they call out. So maybe that addresses the turnout problem. He went beyond that. He and General Parsons put together Retribution, the Sag Harbor raid. Less than a month after Danbury was burned, 120 Connecticut men went across the Sound, burned 12 loaded supply ships in Sag Harbor, came back with 90 prisoners without losing a man, and now Trumbull could swap for some prisoners. But he wasn't done. Next step was put an end to this loyalist issue for good. He and the General Assembly did away with the passivity oath and instead had a signed, certified fidelity oath to Continental Congress and the cause. And if you didn't have one, you couldn't vote, you couldn't sell real estate, and you couldn't travel from one town to another. And then this is a brilliant move, because beforehand they had punished Tories with fines, with jail, and everything. He lays those on them, and then he says this: if you sign fidelity and commitment, you are pardoned and forgiven. So, thought a good cop, bad cop, 1-2 punch. And while that didn't end loyalism, it pretty much ended the likelihood or possibility that southwestern Connecticut was going to go to the crown. Because Ridgefielders, remember, when Continental Congress determined to boycott the king because of the intolerable acts in Boston, Ridgefield freemen chose not to sign, but to stay with the king. After Lexington conquered, Ridgefield freemen did not change their vote. After Bunker Hill, Ridgefield freemen did not change their vote. It was 6 months after Bunker Hill before the freemen of Ridgefield voted to side with the cause as opposed to the king. So the loyalty embed deep. Well, let's wrap things up here now. Because Howe did not want to venture again into southwestern Connecticut, the militia was freed up to go to Saratoga. 1,200 Connecticut militia fought at Saratoga, and Silliman's brigade, part of them went to the Hudson Valley cantonments below Westport, where there was kind of a backup army. They didn't have to defend the Connecticut border any longer. And as most of us know, the real long-term effect was Arnold. Congress gave him his second star. He went on to Saratoga for 2 of the 3 battles there. He carried the day personally by leading troops that led to the surrender at Saratoga of Burgoyne's army, which was really one of the turning points of the war. All of those were consequences which together, as the war wore on, made the action at Ridgefield a statement that will last for a long, long time. As to Tryon, This is what the London press said, 2 months after the action. Tryon was selected for this business in hopes his appearance in the country should draw numbers to join him, but it had not that effect. He has no influence beyond New York. The vision was ended, and it ended not far from the street out in front of us. Well, so that's the Battle of Ridgefield. I get goosebumps each time I go through it, but there might be some questions that can add to the intoxicated level of joy that you can all barely express. Any questions? Yes,
Did they
sir.
come up Old Barlow Road, Old Barlow Mountain Road? There's still a road.
Yes, yes. I
They go
think
through
the
there or
evidence
not?
seems to be that when Worcester came from the Reading, Bethel area, that they cut across Old Barlow Road to come around Barlow Mountain. One of the lakes there, his name evades me at the time, to surprise the British encampment. Yes. Which raises a great question. I mean, this was a large battlefield ranging all the way from Danbury really to the end of town. That the Phase 2 study of the National Park Service report to do the metallic resonating imagery of the ground in this whole thing to see what they can turn up. We're so rich, so much of this land is still roughly available for people to go below ground and see what's there. Anything else? Oh, I opened a Pandora here. Yes, sir.
Could you talk about the training for the militia? In Farmers Against the Crown, you talk about, I think it was like 12 steps just to get one shot off.
Yeah,
which
that's-
was hard enough to do on a parade ground, but in battle, even more difficult for these militia with, I mean, how much actual training do they have?
Well, Governor Trumbull bragged to the British Crown when he still theoretically reported there that the 26,000 Connecticut militia, because if you were between 16 and 65, you were in the militia. You didn't join. You were automatically welcome to the militia. And he claimed that they drilled 4 times a year. And many of them were French and Indian War veterans who had experience and also had firearms that they brought back from it. But it was probably everything from a dog's breakfast of people who didn't want to be there to some units like, well, the Foot Guard in New Haven, Benedict Arnold's unit, was essentially a form of militia who had uniforms and impressed George Washington no end when he saw Arnold's soldiers. So it was all over the map. But you knew how to handle a musket. My God, by the time you were 3 years old, you were shooting squirrels in those days. So, and your sergeant most likely was in the Battle of New York, or if not, fought the French or whatever. And these people, while they looked disorganized, you didn't want to get them in a strong defensive position because they knew how to shoot.
But out in the open, like, you know, Worcester's. the people
Well,
who-
Worcester's,
they-
yeah,
they
we
sort of
saw
just-
that Worcester's men didn't appear to have much of an effect. Because if you're out in the open and you're on the move, and you know, while there are 12 steps into the protocol for firing a musket, you learn pretty fast that you could short circuit that to about 6 just by not waiting for the order to you know, ram cartridge. You go ahead and do it. And, so you get pretty good at it. You learn how to bump the stock. Instead of having to ram it, you throw your cartridge in and you bump it hard and it settles and you're ready to fire in 5 seconds. Okay, so these people in mass with leadership, like Arnold, were dangerous. With Worcester, valiant as he was, the command structure was fractured there, and they were in a terrible decision. No place to hide, really, when they walked in their trap. Yes, sir.
What sort of organization do they have to communicate between Ridgefield, New Haven? It seems like a far distance, and things that seem to be happening very fast on the ground.
Well, yeah, I'll tell you something. Remember McDougal, who I mentioned? He marched his 1,200 men from Peekskill at midnight, 21 miles to Bedford, and was there by 8 in the morning. Okay? Too late. The British had gone. He marched them back. They didn't rest. 42 miles and a little over 24 miles. So, I mean, we're talking about a different kind of person than we have today. Yeah, the fitness level. And if you had a horse, you know, you went until one of you dropped. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Do you have any, and you know, any the weapons that they had? I mean, have you found any of the remains of them? Because I know that our Benedict Arnold men probably had brown besses, but I mean, did a lot of the country people have Kentucky rifles? Did they have Charlemagne?
Well,
What, you know?
Well, obviously you don't know. There's no inventory. In the militia, you were required to bring your own weapon. That was pretty much how it worked. Although some units, you know, like the foot guard, of course, would be better armed. Sure, there were brown besses. There were French muskets. There's a wonderful passage about the New Hampshire militia in 1777, and there's probably a lot of similarity between their country militia and ours. And it almost makes you laugh, describing how they looked. And they had blunderbusses, they had Spanish fusils from the 1500s, you know, they had, you couldn't roll cartridges and distribute them to a whole company of men because everybody had a different kind of weapon, and so they had to roll their own. So it was everything you could imagine. Now, you go to Fairfield, the Fairfield militia had a reputation for being a crack outfit, so probably something different there.
I mean, have you excavated any bullets that tell you this caliber?
Oh yeah, the cannonballs have been found here. There's the one in the house, and you know, the phase 2 study. I mean, excavation of bullets will be probably the number one thing they come up with, or not bullets, but musket balls. What was found was an original musket from the 23rd Regiment of Foot that was left behind or taken from a British soldier here. A Wilton guy owns it, and we'd love at the Historical Society to get our hands on that, but a lot of other people would too. But no, there's no formal inventory. On this side of the room? Yeah, the back.
On your slide regarding the skeleton arrangements, in an engagement of this size, what would the burial practices be?
Well, that's a good question. I guess what we know from the British is regimental pride was extremely strong, and they would not have a uniform defaced by leaving somebody buried in the uniform if they had time to strip the uniform and preserve the pride of the regiment. We know that generally if they were Christian, they were buried east-west orientation, so they were facing the rising sun to be welcomed into the afterlife. Other than that, it was how much time did you have and how deep could you dig in that amount of time. Enlisted men would tend to be thrown in mass. An officer would be buried separately. But other than that, really can't tell you much.
So typically where they fell?
I'm sorry?
So typically where they fell?
The British would bury, well, not if it was an officer, and same with the Americans. They would bring an officer back whenever they could. I mean, Gould, who was killed, was brought back on his horse all the way to Stratford. Yes, sir?
The 1800 British troops, they were trained regulars, so they were used to camping in mass and everything. How large was the campground after the battle? How many acres of land would 1,800 men?
Well, we know that they encamped in a military defensive position, 4 regiments in line and 2 regiments as in a cross, almost as if you were forming a square to take on a cavalry charge. They clearly expected to be contested. That took up a lot of space. Now, we don't know whether they had tents or not. We do know the first night they slept on their arms on the march, so they may well have just been sleeping on the ground. But that many men left a mark of some sort that the phase 2 study, you know, we would hope would come up with some amazing things, buttons, coins, you name it. Okay, one more, and then, oh. This is a trick question, folks. This is a fellow reenactor of mine in the back. Could you speak up, old man? You got me there, yeah.
One marker is the burial site in front of the statue. The other one is where Wooster was shot. And the other one is where Arnold's horse was shot. Do you know from your research, are those markers actually in the right spots?
No. No. Well, first of all, the one with the 16 British dead and the 8 American dead is not a grave site. It's simply a memorial marker that's near the barricade. It doesn't have anything to do with where the bodies are, as best we can tell. And Wooster, who knows whether that plaque? I mean, the marker went up by the Freemasons many years after the fact. As to whether that was the exact spot, who knows? And some of the signs around town about, I'm sorry, they need to be rewritten because the facts are, we have a fresh set of facts that contradict some of it for those who remember what they read, which is getting harder. Okay, let's wrap it. Steve, you want to?
Share the story behind the cover art for your book. It's a beautiful painting.
Oh, the cover art. Yeah, very important. Well, first of all, you got to see the book if you haven't. This. I'm sorry if I'm keeping everyone. I know you haven't realized to go back to. This is a replica of an oil painting by Dale Gallen, who's the artist in residence at the Gettysburg Battlefield. I guess about 4 or 5 years ago, a friend of his, Ken Lawrence, I think, Ken, are you here? Yeah, Ken here got in touch with me as saying his friend Dale came across my first book and wanted to do an oil depiction of it. And so we had some conversations, and to the best of my knowledge at the time, he got it as correct as you could, given scale and perspective. And the original does hang in his gallery in Gettysburg, but he has giclées and prints of it, which to my mind is a better rendition by far than the British print that shows the grenadiers almost on him with bayonets. So, Steve, anything else?
Thank
Anyway.
you all for joining us. Keith will be signing books at the back of the room, and please enjoy some refreshments. Thank you.
Thank you.